let each of them introduce themselves. I'm State Representative Tim Miller. Here in Olivia, Renville County is one of my districts. I have Swift, Chippewa, all of Renville County except for two townships, Birch Coulee, and the one right next to it. Beaver Falls. That's what I wanted to say, but I thought that didn't sound right. Birch Coulee, Beaver Falls. And then I have 4 townships in Kaneohe County. And I so appreciate each and every one of you coming here today. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself to everyone, but the handful of people I introduced myself to, there's a broad group here. We have producers, we have people from state government here, we have people with watershed districts, SWCDs, everyone's here, and that's what's important because this is going to be a discussion. You know, ostensibly we're talking about buffer law, but this is about water cleanliness in our state, particularly out here. And everyone in this room, we can agree on one thing, that we all want clean water, correct? So this is going to be an open discussion, candid. I hope that people ask good questions. If you have something that you want to state, I encourage you to do that as well. I will kind of be facilitating the time just to make sure that we kind of keep things moving along. But of course, I want to make sure that everyone gets their opportunity to speak. I ask that all of you do that as well. So as we get started, if you guys want to come on out, this is the chair of the Environment Committee, Denny McNamara. We have Representative Paul Torkelson, who actually has those 2 townships here in Renville County, and then Representative Steve Green. I'll give each of them just a moment to introduce themselves and say what you want to say before we get started.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. As Tim said, I'm Denny McNamara. I chair the Environment, Natural Resources Policy and Finance Committee. One thing, maybe all those that work for state government, you could raise your hand, so just so folks know, I know former Senator Frederickson's here, the regional director. Thanks, Denny, for coming with the DNR, and so he'll be here to listen, and specifically here, it's a listening session, so he's here. And sir, if you could identify the agency you're with.
I'm with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I'm Wayne Cords. I'm the South Regional Manager out of Mankato.
Cool, and I don't know if anybody from Bowser or other state agencies are here, so good, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, sir, and you're with?
Bowser.
Okay, with Bowser, so the 3 agencies that, for the most part, we deal with in our committee are here. I was a landscape contractor, small business owner for 30 years before I got into the legislature. I've been in the legislature 14 years. So we're here to listen, that's what it's about. This is the 4th one we've done in 2 days. I've got, I think 700 miles on right now on my car in the last 2 days, and so it was in Thief River Falls and Bagley yesterday. We have districts, Representative Green's district, Bagley, and then up with Representative Fabian last night, or yesterday afternoon in Thief River, and this morning with Representative Backer out in Chicago in the fire hall there. So thank you for, Representative Miller, thanks for having us and appreciate it. We are here to listen.
Very good. Well, thanks, Tim, for calling this meeting. I'm Paul Torkelson. I represent 2 townships down here in the very southern part of Renville County. Most of my district is all of Brown County and a large portion of Redwood County. I'm a farmer by trade. I farm in Watonwan County. I've never represented my farm or my hometown of St. James. That's a long story. We won't go into that. But I've been in the legislature. This is my 4th term, and about midway through the term, the chair of the Environment Committee, who you just heard from, Mr. McNamara, came to me and said, I want you to deal with this buffer issue. As you all know, the governor was the one that brought it forward. It really, in my mind, kind of grew out of the Pheasant Summit that occurred some over a year ago. The governor's original proposal was much more extensive and dramatic than what we ended up with. But it's still difficult work, challenging. At the end of the session, I kind of felt that we had reached a good compromise because everyone was disappointed. Whether you're from the environmental community or from state government or a farmer, pretty much everyone had a beef with what happened, so that's probably kind of the spot you want to be in. We most recently had a very difficult time because the agencies and the governor really tried to expand the intent of the legislation beyond what we felt we had passed and tried to expand it to include private ditches. There's a big problem with that in that we don't know, there is no definition of what a private ditch is. And so if you're going to would try to include them, where do you start, where do you stop? We felt that was way out of line. The bill's impact is on public waters, of which there is an inventory the DNR has, and they have promised they would not expand that inventory during the process of this implementation. And the other affected bodies are the public ditches, and the counties have a record of what public ditches are. DNR is in the process of assembling that. Some counties have up-to-date digital information, other counties have paper records in a cardboard box someplace in the safe. So that's kind of where we're at today. I know there are some unanswered questions that we intend to address with either legislation or rules coming up this year, and I'd be happy to do what we can today to explain any questions you might need answered. I'd like to thank Tim for calling the meeting. As Danny said, this is a controversial issue. It's gotten a lot of people excited all around the state. Our objective is to do something that makes sense, is practical, is manageable, and actually has an impact not only on the quality of water, but also, I think we all, most of us in this room anyway, understand how important the drainage system, including ditches, is to the success of agriculture in the state of Minnesota. And protecting and maintaining those ditches is critical. And a reasonable sized buffer helps us do that well. I'm sure you all have maybe seen examples of some of us in agriculture that get a little too aggressive and maybe put that first row of corn on the crown of the ditch or possibly even into the ditch. That's not good. That's not good for the ditch. It's not good for our image. So that's one important thing that is part of this legislation. The other big piece, I think, is getting the control of this into county hands or local ditch authority hands rather than somebody at the state level. That's a big deal. We all have better relationships with our local county board members. I hope we do anyway. I'm not looking at anybody in particular, but at least they're friends and neighbors that we can communicate with as we work through issues surrounding this. With that, thank you, Tim, for calling me.
So I'll just stand from here. I'm not from your district. My name is Steve Green. I serve District 2B. It's up in northern Minnesota. And the reason that I'm here today is, well, support for Tim, but this is an important issue across the state. And I want to know what you guys are thinking in southern Minnesota. We all work together on this. And so I'm going to leave it at that. If you have any questions for me specifically, which I can't imagine you would, I'll surely try to answer them, but otherwise I want to hear from you guys, so let's get started.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And we really want to hear from all of you with your questions, comments, concerns. And I would like to, I think you gave a great introduction to it, Representative Torkelson, but I would like to give Chair McNamara an opportunity if you kind of wanted to give kind of a scope, and then we'll kind of roll into the conversation.
Well, maybe I'll just, because some of you are specifically wondering how it all shook out with the governor and his acknowledging that Representative Torkelson and Senator Tomassoni's position was accurate, and he agreed to the agreement. We passed the bill last year in special session. We thought very clearly Representative Torkelson testified in conference committee. A conference committee is where the Senate and the House come together, the conferees, to settle the differences between the two bills. Senator Tomassoni and I, with Representative Torkelson and Senator Skoye, who's a good farmer from northwestern Minnesota, and Representative Torkelson were the chief folks on the bill that got the work done. And Representative Torkelson testified exactly what the bill included. And no time at any time did it ever include private ditches. Bowser put out on its website in June of last summer, in June of 15, laid out what was included in the bill, public waters. And what's included in the bill is the speeding up. If you're on a public ditch, you no longer will be able to wait until redetermination to buffer 16 and a half feet. You will need to buffer by the end of 18 the 16 and a half feet on a public ditch. Public ditches are legally defined in law. That's what the governor agreed, and that's what was on at the time. That's what was on Bowser's website in June. Unfortunately, sometime later in the summer, I believe pushed by some group somewhere, let the governor know that, hey, there's a couple words in that bill that you could use, benefited area, to interpret that not only did it mean public ditches, it could mean benefited area to public ditches. So Bowser changed, they changed what they had on their website, and they included those two words. And they let it know to Paul and I that they intended to include private ditches. We met with them a number of times and told them we didn't feel that was honoring the agreement we had, which was very clear. Representative Torkelson, we asked them to go back and listen to the tapes and hear Paul testify in committee as to what it was. It was a speeding up of current law for public ditches. Unfortunately, the governor continued to not agree. So Senator Thomasoni and I agreed to write a letter. A Democrat senator, a Republican House member, wrote a letter to the Democrat governor and said, please follow what we meant. Follow the legislative intent, which is the highest standard, is legislative intent. The governor asked, can I have some time to meet with you before you present that letter to the public? We said, sure, that's a fair chance to meet with the governor and have an opportunity to discuss it. Unfortunately, his father was sick at the time and has since passed away, so it took a number of months to meet with the governor. Representative Torkelson and I met with the governor last week. It all kind of becomes a blur. Last week, and unfortunately the governor wanted to make it political and he only had the Republican House members come to the meeting with the governor. He did not have the Democrat Senate, even though, sorry, when you have a Democrat Senate, a Democrat governor, and a Republican House, you all got to come together and agree to pass legislation. It was better for the governor to point the finger at Representative Torkelson and I and say we were the ones. Well, the reality is, anyway, we went to the meeting, the governor came to the meeting and he said, I'll do what you guys want to do. I'll abide by the agreement. We said, that's great. We're not interested in finger pointing. And some of you may say, well, you're sure giving a pretty partisan spin to it, Denny. Sorry, that's exactly how it happened. That's exactly what the truth is. Today, they're abiding by the agreement that we will, public ditches were included, private ditches were not. The maps will be developed with public ditches on them. DNR's only role in this effort is to map it. You'll deal with the local SWCDs. The enforcement is through the county attorney if it gets to that point. It's a $500 APO fine. That's the maximum it is. It's not the $10,000 the governor proposed. It's not 50 foot on all perennial waters. That was, I believe, the original bill. Representative Torkelson took on an unbelievable project. He's a producer, a great producer, who got a big target on his back when I begged him to carry this bill because we wanted to make it a lot better. It was scary what it was. And I think with what we ended up with is something, I'm reminded I'm not supposed to say it's a great thing. I'm supposed to say it's something that we can all live with and move forward in a very positive way. So that might answer some of your questions about, is the governor going to go and do something or whatever. The governor has agreed what the scope of the bill is. Is there some gray areas? Yes, absolutely. And so I think what we mostly want to do is have questions from you. As we said, PCA, DNR, and Bowser are all here to listen. We're here to listen. Representative Miller wants to know what you folks think and what your thoughts are. Most likely are from all a really broad interest. What we've been doing is if everybody could get an opportunity to ask one question before you get to answer a second one, so that we give everybody a shot at a question. And then we all are really good at editorializing, and I just show you one of the better efforts. Took 10 minutes to explain something that could have maybe been done shorter. I'll beg you to please just editorialize for a minute or less and then ask your question. Or some of you may just want to make a comment for us to hear. That's okay. It doesn't have to be framed in a question. It's okay to tell us, hey, McNamara, we think what you did stinks. That's all I have to say. I mean, that we should hear that if that's what you do. So, and we'll try and raise hands. Please don't blurt out. If somebody, one of your fellow neighbors makes a comment and you agree or disagree, it'd be nice if we didn't blurt out. Does that work, Tim?
Real good. A couple quick things. Thank you, Representative McNamara. Two real small things and then one other. There are more chairs in that back closet for people that aren't sitting. There were a couple stacked over there, but I believe there's still a few over there. So there's some chairs over there in the closet if you'd like to have a seat. There's 2 in the front row, don't be shy, right? This is very simply, if you'd like to receive email updates from me, just put your name and your email address on here and I'll have my legislative assistant put it into the system, and that's all you're gonna get is email updates from me. It won't be above and beyond that. And then the one other thing that I wanted to share, and then we'll probably start taking questions and comments, is as Denny was speaking, Senator Coonan came in, so I want to recognize him. And if you'd like to come up and join us, you're more than welcome to.
Come on, Lyle.
Yeah.
But, first of all, I want to say that Representative Miller and Chair McNamara and the rest of these gentlemen organized this. I'm here like the rest of you. I found out about it. And I think it's really important that since I represent, this area in the Minnesota Senate, to hear what you have to say. So thank you all for setting this up. I think that was a good thing. It's an important issue that we need to get a better understanding of what all you think about it, and then bring that message back to St. Paul. So, and I don't know if you guys decide if you want me up there or not. I'm not here to crash your party.
Yeah.
More than welcome to.
Why don't you come up? It's as much your place as it is Representative Miller, you both got it.
One more target.
That's exactly what I was going to say anyway. If there's any tough questions, send it to Senator Coonan, please.
Yeah, Lyle.
It's all his fault, so. Okay, so usually the first question or comment is a little bit slow and then we get going pretty quickly. So who wants to be the first person that has a question, comment, or opinion? Right there. And if you could, just quickly say your name just so that, not for any reason.
Just
other
your
than-
first name if
Yeah,
you don't
first
mind,
name is
and
fine.
if you stand up, then everybody will probably be able to hear you. We might not have to repeat it.
Well, I'm Corny Groom. Just wondering what Bowser is. You were talking.
You want to do it?
Sure. Bowser is the Board of Water and Soil Resources. It's a state, they're not a state, well, boy, I'm going to get in trouble if I don't say this right. They're not a state agency as such, but they oversee wetlands in the state of Minnesota. I'm looking to the Bowser guy to help me out.
Right here is Bowser.
Oh, there's the
Kelly's on the
wrong
Bowser
guy.
board.
There's the Bowser guy, sorry.
Catherine's on the Bowser board.
Yeah.
We look at wetlands and we also.
Stand up, please. Speak out.
Very tall. Board of Water and Soil Resources, of which there are representatives throughout the state of Minnesota, look at wetland projects and try to make certain that there is oversight on the processes that are going about in the state of Minnesota, such that if you have land that you want to put into a wetland replacement, there needs to be approval given to that as to how that is done or where it is done. It's oversight, basically. And we enforce what has been determined by the legislature to be moved forward.
We have a very close relationship with your SWCD.
Yes, we do. The Board of Water and Soil Resources is the major oversight group over the soil and water conservation districts, looking at what they are doing as well as providing some funding through grants and other efforts. We also have opportunity to give some advice to soil and the board, or the Board of Water and Soil has some opportunity to give advice to local soil and water conservation districts as to what they might be looking at as projects for the coming year or efforts that in their county might be helpful. The funding is often given out. This time around, there's $100,000 gratefully from the legislative bodies given to work on the buffers, and that is to see that there are buffers along the areas there should be, and then report to the ditch authority, which would be the county board in most cases, and they are the enforcers, not soil and water conservation district, so be aware of that. Soil and water conservation district people are only doing the work for the county, giving the information to them, and further to that to the county attorney if necessary. And so anyway, most of the funding that comes from Bowser to the soil and water conservation districts is through grant application, in addition to the funding that has been given. I think that's a pretty fair assessment of it. There are representatives from, as I said, throughout the state of Minnesota from various organizations. There are 3 representatives from soil and water conservation districts. They are myself, Steve Sunderland from West, and also, I'm drawing a blank just now. Steve Sunderland, myself, and Tom Schultz from northern Minnesota. Others on the committee are from cities, small cities and so forth. Doug Erickson from Bird Island happens to be on the Bowser board. Doug is here. And a colleague here too is on the Southern Committee. Are we on grants together?
Yep.
We're on grants, grant review committees. So it's a pretty ambitious group that we are, and we are also overseen by the legislature too. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Tom Kelleher. I'm retired. I'm also a sitting member of the Olivia City Council. Number one, I'd like to commend the state legislature for passing the buffer law. I think it caught most of us by surprise that it actually got passed in 1 year. So kudos to you guys. I think it's a good start. My comment is that after being on the city council and looking at the amount of money that cities and municipalities spend on clean water, we're charged by the state and by the federal government to discharge our water at a specific quality. The same with our stormwater. We just recently had to spend upwards of $200,000 to put in a stormwater pond to collect all the runoff off our cities and streets before we discharge it into County 63. It has to meet certain qualities. What upsets us as city council people and representing the people of the city of Olivia is the great expense that they all share to keep our water clean. But on the other side of the drainage ditch, it's kind of the wild, wild west. We think the buffer law is a good start, but we also think that we need to start looking at how we can help clean up the agricultural drainage and the pollution that we've got coming off of so-called non-chlorine sources. We believe that all sources are point sources these days. It's not hard to find the originality from a pollutant source. So I think it's a good start, and I would like to see water quality standards fairly spread out across the state of every industry that discharges water. If we do that, we won't have a water quality issue. Thank you.
Tom, thank you. And Tom, how long have you been retired now?
About 8 months.
Tom is an individual who has really put his heart and soul into his job for a long, long time. I've been on a number of tours and has done great work, and thank you for that. And I'm sure you're tickled to see that we were able to get $22 million out to SWCDs after the tough time you've been through. Okay, fire away. Go ahead.
I'll make a comment since the comments are a little slow. I'd like to, I've emailed both Representative Miller, Senator Coonan, and Representative Torkelson. I'm Karen Flum. I'm the district manager at the Renville Soil and Water Conservation District. And I guess I would like to plead for your support for the bonding bill. We in Renville County, as you know, Renville and Redwood are the 2 top counties for conservation easements in the state. And we currently have 81 landowners on a waiting list for 65 for buffer easements and the rest for wetland restorations. Some of them have been on the waiting list for 3 years. We didn't have much luck with the last turnaround of applications in July of 2014. We had 28, I believe, and none of them were accepted. And many of those people, I think 25 of them, are still on the waiting list. Those are all for buffer. Those are all for buffer easements. And then we, in addition, added to be up to 81.
You know, and thank you for making those comments. The MPCA is under the jurisdiction of our committee, and in the Senate under Senator Marty and Senator Thomasoni, depending on whether it's policy or finance there. You make a good point about the need for flexibility, but at the same point, I I don't think I heard this in you, but they don't have the ability to circumnavigate the law and say, you know what, we'll grant you a variance even though state law says we can't.
Right.
Now, should there be a process of where you should have some flexibility? Yes, and I can't speak specifically to the, you know, the ponding basin's ability to how much water it holds, and you mentioned specifically you had an engineered solution to allow it to hold more, and you needed that variance. I can't speak to all that, but we're here to listen, to hear those, because that's the kind of stuff we want to bring back, and MPCA is here to hear it too, though I guess they probably have already heard from you. That's good for us to know and hear and see if we can build flexibility into these things, because I think you said it was a rain event, or the beats were extra high moisture that year, or I don't know what particular, but the reality, when you're producers, farmers, some things we can't control, and weather's the biggest one, so.
Right.
Thank you, appreciate that. I thought I saw another hand.
Right over there.
Glenn Jacobson, County Attorney's Office. You had mentioned that there is no definition of a private ditch, but that there was of a public ditch, where I find a definition of a ditch, I find a definition of a drainage system, and I find a definition of public water. If you're gonna try to make a distinction between a public ditch and a private ditch when neither of those terms is defined, you're in for a world of hurt.
Why don't I ask you, it is defined in law?
No, I just looked,
Well-
it's not. What's the site then?
If
What's
you
that?
actually want to get into that discussion of whether,
What is the site?
I don't know it by heart, but Harry, will you research it and get back to before the meeting ends?
Yep.
Harry, find out what the actual definition, and cite him the statute, sub-statute, and letter he needs, so he gets it right.
In general terms, public ditches are those that are administered by a local water authority, whether it be the county board or the drainage district. And those agencies have the power to assess the beneficiaries of that public ditch.
So what
on
we
their
refer to as a
property.
judicial ditch.
That's probably an
Judicial ditch is a
interchangeable term, yes.
Right.
Jim Zink from London. Question that I had from this thing from the get-go is, how,
It's Jim, right?
Yeah, Jim.
You know what, we're gonna wait until their conversation is done. So let's, time out. Sir, did you get your, Harry's gonna research the definition of a public ditch, so you know where in statute it's defined if it's referenced to another one. And then if, you know, what we'll do above and beyond that, if you have a question, we'll go in order. So Jim, why don't you go next?
when a drainage ditch is constructed, it's dug out, and you got a berm here, and that berm is leveled off and farmed. So when the water comes from the high ground and comes down, it doesn't flow into the ditch, it sits in the low ground here beside the ditch. It doesn't run uphill and into the ditch unless there's a really flood event. So my question is, what are we really talking about here? I mean, it's just like clean water is something that we all like to talk about, but nobody ever does anything about it, and this is a good example of not doing anything about it. Because if you really want to do something about it, you control the water that, where it enters from an intake back here someplace. You don't put, I mean, 5 foot of grass along a ditch would do as much as 16 foot will do. Because water doesn't flow uphill and into the ditch. It flows in from some other source. Or there are probably spillways where it comes in. And certainly they should be buffered, but not the whole ditch. That doesn't make any sense at all. It's just, is this a wildlife issue? Is this something for pheasants? Is this what it's really about? I mean, is Pheasant Forever a big contributor to somebody, or what's going on? Because it has nothing to do with clean water, it's all about wildlife.
Well, thank you, Jim, for those comments. It's probably the comment that I hear most often is that on a burn, oops, sorry about that. I don't think it's the governor calling. I forgot to turn it down. You're absolutely right. You know, water does not flow uphill. There's no doubt about that. I mentioned earlier the need to protect our ditches in the ditch system, and I think it's important to remember where the governor started on this. He started at 50 feet. He wanted 50 feet everywhere. 16 and a half in some cases is a lot, but it's where we ended up. And the reason we ended up there is because that was already part of the state rules. once a ditch authority redetermined the benefits on any public ditch system or judicial ditch system, if we want to keep it straight with the lawyer, and I try to do that, then this 16.5-foot buffer was already required. It's not new. It was in state law since, I believe, the 70s sometime. So that's where the 16.5 feet came from. You know, the complaint I hear from the other side is it's just a access to clean out your ditch. I don't believe that. I think it actually is something important. I know there's consternation, and there are within this law also a number of other variances that allow for more flexibility. One is you can hay and graze those buffers. That's not good for everybody. It's good for some people. You can grow alfalfa on there if you choose to, and you don't have to get a permit to reseed your ditch buffers. You can install and repair tile that happen to cross that ditch buffer without a permit. These are all good things. And if you can demonstrate, and this is where it gets a little gray, I have to admit, but if you can demonstrate that what you're doing is doing just as much good for water quality as a buffer would do, they can relieve you of the requirement for that buffer.
And Paul, some of those things you mentioned are new changes.
They're all new.
You used to had to get a permit to cross the buffer going into a ditch, and they could deny that and you didn't get to fix your tile. So those are some of the common sense things we were able to get through with this legislation.
And I just want to comment real quick. You know, again, I started this with we all want clean water, right? And that includes the producers. Everyone up here fully understands the way that you just described it. We say, well, yes, that's what we see. That's not necessarily the case with everyone in the legislature or in the governor's office. And one of the concerns that I had is that talking about buffers alone was just a little bit too simplistic. Now there is the alternative practices is what they referred to. There's about 8 different alternative practices. Some of them already exist, some of them can be implemented, as they said, without permitting. That's one of the areas that I'd like to see us address is some of the expanded. If we're going to talk truly about clean water and some of those issues, there are other alternative practices that I'd like to include. One of my more favorite ones is pattern tiling. And if you properly install pattern tiling, you have water retained in the field. You have the water that's coming off as much cleaner, and you have better land or better soil that you can grow more product in. That would be the ideal, right? Now that's not going to be a solution for everyone, not everywhere in the state of Minnesota. But that's just my example of some of the things that we need to have a discussion. If we are totally going to agree that we need to talk about clean water, I agree with you that maybe just simply talking about buffers alone was perhaps not the best route to go.
I'd just like to comment on the wildlife portion of this. You know, you're right, this did generate out of Pheasants Forever and the Pheasant Summit that was held in Marshall some over a year ago, but there is no mention of wildlife habitat in the legislation that passed. I don't believe anybody's going to come out and take my farm or anybody else's farm and take it away, force us to give up land just for wildlife habitat. I don't think that's appropriate. I know lots of farmers who have voluntarily put land in a set aside with wildlife in mind, and that's great. If they do it on a voluntary basis, that's their right to do with their private land as they choose. But for the government to come and take away your land for wildlife habitat, I cannot stomach that.
Yes, sir.
Mickey Peterson from Sacred Heart. What is the baseline that they're going to use for this water? I mean, you have a baseline to start with before you know if all these buffers are going to make any improvement. What basis are they going to start this at?
I'm not sure. That's a concern as well. But do you have an answer?
Well, what I would say is that the MPCA is the agency that monitors water quality, right? I should have let Torque answer it probably, but they we spend millions of dollars with them to monitor that currently. But the idea that every place that we put any buffer on, we're going to be able to specifically point and tell you exactly what happened, that would be an oversimplification. But where there's some good parts to the bill about keeping track of what's going on, I think that some additional monitoring and measurement in some way, if we can maybe incorporate what MPCA is already doing, would be good. Because we would like to see, oh, it's working, it's better. mean, your point is, or, you know, you could argue, oh, should we be doing more, or what, does it even not even matter? Maybe we don't need to do one part of it. But doesn't that point, well, that points to the local flexible, working with the local SWCD people on the ground, working with the producers to find these alternative practices and such that do make sense. I mean, that's a big component of it.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Since the 3/8 of a cent sales tax was passed some years ago, we've been on a track to much more aggressively test and monitor all the waters of the state of Minnesota. We're on a 10-year cycle where we've divided the state into the 81, I believe it is, major watersheds. And over a 10-year period, all of those will be tested very aggressively. MPCA is in charge of doing that. So we will have some baseline information. Now, can you take that baseline information down to your particular ditch? Probably not. But we will get a general picture of whether water quality is improving or deteriorating in the state of Minnesota. Do I believe that these buffers are going to be the be-all, end-all cure to water quality problems in Minnesota? Not for a minute.
Thank you for having this session today. My name is Peg, and I live with my husband on a farm in the Sacred Heart area in the Hot Creek Township. And since you've alluded to it a couple of times, I just want to reinforce the fact that while this may seem like an agriculture issue, it's a taxpayer issue, and there's a lot of people that would have liked to have been here today that aren't necessarily farmers that would have appreciated speaking to this issue and tell you their thoughts about the investment that taxpayers are making into buffers and that they support it. And I also wanted to talk, we've talked a lot about buffers, but since this was an environmental listening session, and we're talking about tiling and it's come up, you know, if you buffer the top of a ditch and then somebody's emptying their drain tile below that buffer into the ditch, it's not going to impact the water quality. So if we're trying to get baselines and we're trying to measure the effectiveness of buffers, there's a lot more involved in determining what's contributing, because the artificial inputs that are being put on the land that the buffers are supposed to capture, if they go down into that drain tile and the drain tile carries it right to the ditch below the buffer, it's not going to help. And so there's probably other things that need to be looked at and considered when we're trying to say we're going to improve water quality, because the last thing we would like to see is for everybody to put all this energy into buffers and then not have the water quality change because we weren't thinking holistically or seeing the big picture. So thank you.
Well, thank you for those comments. You know, buffers are just one step. The impact of tile drainage on water quality is mixed. And, you know, if you talk to the experts that have studied this, you say, what's the impact of tile drainage? They'll say it depends. And that's because it depends on the landscape that it's installed on. It depends on the type of system that's installed. But you have to remember, all that water that goes through a tile system has been filtered by the land above it. And that does deal with most of the impact to water. And really, we end up with pretty clean water coming out of tile intakes. The big challenge, of course, is nitrates. And that is one that we are working on hard to try and figure out an answer to. It's a real conundrum because you cannot grow a decent crop without an adequate amount of nitrogen in the soil. At the same time, nitrogen moves with water. So in my mind, the best thing we can do is look at opportunities to hold water on the landscape. If you can hold water for even a short time, whether it's in a holding pond or even in the ditch itself, you lose nitrogen evaporates basically from that water rather quickly. And to my mind, that is the best thing that we can take a look at in that area.
And to that point, we are doing some things with the dedicated sales tax money about doing projects that are holding the water back for water quality, for flood control, and they actually have great habitat value too for wildlife. So it's really a threefer. And then to another point I want to make, the $22 million from clean water money in this next 2 years and ongoing funding after that to the SWCDs to work with producers on alternative practices. And maybe it's a suggestion that some grass or in a certain point to catch it where there's an intake and stuff like that. That's built into this bill. I mean, the thoughts are really of producers working with people locally on the ground. Is the idea.
Catherine Kelly again. One of the things that we've alluded to here has been the use of buffers for water purification. And the longer piece of that would be how, we don't want our soil going down the drainage ditch. Buffers also hold it on the land, so farmers aren't exchanging their topsoil as it's blowing in the winter time, and you've seen it in the ditches along the way. So I think there's another good thing that happens. You hold it a bit on the ground by the grassland. If you've driven north on Highway 71 in the winter time and you've seen how the snow also is kept off the highways, it's because there's a grassland off to the west. And that helps the county out because they don't have to go out and clean it off quite as much. They can just make a pass through there. So that's another benefit of the grassland or the buffers. It holds the soil and it holds the snow off the highways if it's along the highway. And I also want to say that I believe in our area we have some good players. We have people who are very environmentally conscious. They are doing good work on the ground. They're good players. They're looking into the future. After all, we're short-term on this ground. We look forward to the next generation being able to enjoy the same things that we have. Thus, they are buffering, they are doing other good conservation practices. We support all of that, all of us, no matter what position we're in, because we're good citizens. And so to those who are going ahead with that, and are considering doing more things, I urge you to talk to your local soil and water conservation district office, because there is cost share and funding that will help you with that. So don't be shy. The office is on the towards the middle end after the intersection of 71 and 212. And see Karen.
Over here.
Hi, Christy Zajac from the Redwood Soil and Water Office, and I spend a lot of my time doing the Wetland Conservation Act, and then the remainder of my time doing all the Farm Bill provisions like CRP and RIM and CREP and the like. And I just want to say that our interest in conservation programs, I've been in the field of conservation since '96, and this is the greatest interest I have ever seen overall. Money or no money, people are very interested, and so from my perspective, I would love to see funding for people that come in and want to do conservation practices. I'd love to see that continued in full force as best you can. And then secondly, I have a question, because the $500 thing has come up, and my job is going to be the buffer portion out of my county. What exactly does $500 mean? I know you mentioned a flat price, $500 an acre, $500 a year, $500 a, what is this? What does that mean?
Well, there wasn't much interest in a lot of penalties in this work.
By us.
By us. The governor's original proposal was that DNR would be able to impose a $20,000 penalty on anybody who didn't do exactly what the DNR told them to do. We didn't feel that was the right approach for landowners and farmers in the state of Minnesota. So the $500 is Bowser's APO authority. They've had this authority for a long time, but they've never had to use it. It's if you've got a really bad actor who just won't, who is causing severe soil erosion and won't do anything, then the $500 fine is available to try and convince them to do the right thing.
I am not a producer, right? Not on a per acre.
It's per person, yeah, not per acre, right?
Paul, per person or per parcel?
I'm not sure, honestly.
And it's also
That's
per
right.
year basically. So if I remember right, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, when if the SWCD comes out and assesses that you're in violation, they report to the county. The county can, if they wish, impose a fine up to $500, and it's up to your county board at that point. And once you're notified of the violation, you'll have 11 months to comply. At the end of the 11 months, if you haven't complied, you can be fined up to $500. And then if you choose to not fix the violation, then you get notification again for another 11 months.
It should, yes, and it should be understood that when we have these conversations, Bowser has this APO authority. for the absolute bad actor where they can't come to some sort of conclusion. But we believe that between the ditch authority and the soil and water conservation districts and the landowner, that they can come to some sort of local conclusion. They just put that up to $500 in there in the event that that was their, if you will, the last recourse. When we were in the meetings, Bowser had said that to this point, I believe they only threatened the APO authority once, and they actually backed away from it.
Yeah, they've never collected.
They've never collected.
You might have, like you said, I think it was a threat, or said, we're gonna fine you if you didn't do what you needed to do, and then they finally did it.
Right. Yep, go ahead.
James Connie, I'm a dairy producer in southern Renville County, Birch Coulee and Beaver Falls. And this $500 fine per producer is a huge loophole. Because as a small producer, I've got 200 acres. If you got a producer that's got 20,000 acres, and they've got how many miles of buffers to put in, they don't care if they're gonna put in any of those buffers if they're only gonna pay $500 a year. That's a huge loophole. Are you gonna correct that?
Well, I don't know if I would define it as a loophole. I mean, the APO authority penalty is not what this bill is about. This bill is about getting SWCDs with adequate funding to work with producers and get good things done. You know, the reality, if they're doing that, we got other problems that they're doing. So if it becomes a problem, we're gonna need to look at it. But they haven't used the authority. They were aware, Director Jaski went back 10 years, and under current situation, they had used the authority once and got the producer to do whatever they needed done, and they never ended up collecting the fine. So based on the last 10 years, and what we've heard across the state in the last couple of days, I think we're making huge steps forward.
If I could,
We're hopeful it won't get used.
If I could, Denny, and correct me if I'm wrong too, now, this bill is not going to affect in any way the authority of the agencies to prevent pollution the way they were doing before.
That's
This is,
correct.
you know, so,
I think it's important to remember that we really modeled this on 6 counties in Minnesota that have all their buffers in place. I can't name them right now, but there are 6 counties that have their buffers on public waters and public ditches already in place. They did it without this legislation being in place, and they did it without any penalties in place. I think in some of those counties, I don't know if in all, but in some of those counties, there was 2 or 3% that were unwilling at first to cooperate, but after a letter from the county attorney who skipped out on us, they cooperated. So I have great faith in our landowners and farmers to do the right thing. Now, there's going to be some discussion about where this applies and how it applies and what how the variances work, and we'll work through that. We'll get it done. Lon?
If you look at what's happened so far over the years, as far as farmers adopting good conservation practices, it's been voluntary and more of the carrot than the stick approach. And, you know, working with the SWCDs and FSA for CREP or CRP, I mean. And I just think that's a much better approach. What you bring up is somebody who just plain refuses to set up a buffer or other practice that might be required. That could be, but I think we need to let this work before you get to that step and see where we're at. Like those 6 counties, they made it without penalties, and I do think that's possible. But again, I just think the carrot approach is much better than the stick approach on this. And as far as the funding, SWCDs have applications for projects that they can't fund. I think that's an important thing too, to get those funded, that we get that level up there so that willing landowners and farmers can actually get these projects on the ground.
Yeah, right there.
Well, I'd just like to say that after 37 years in the Conservation